In this video, we are going to be looking at the American Revolution, the first time a colony has broken away from the British Empire. So as always, let's start with a bit of context. If we go all the way back to the 1700s, North America did not look anything like we know today. At the time, European powers were competing for global influence, and Britain controlled 13 colonies along the east coast of North America. Britain also held very lucrative colonies in the Caribbean, and many saw Britain's wealth and status as a world power as closely linked to their empire. But when we start to look at the 13 colonies, things were rapidly changing during the 1700s. At the start of the century, their population was around 250,000, but by 1775 it had exploded to 2.5 million people. For comparison, Britain's population at that time was around 7.5 million. The colonists were a mix of different groups. Some were European settlers, mainly of British origin, who came seeking religious freedom or economic opportunity. There were also indentured servants from Europe, who worked for years for free in exchange for free passage to the Americas. I'll touch upon the transatlantic slave trade more in a later video, but you also have enslaved Africans living in America, especially in the southern colonies. Each colony had their own history, government, and identity. In many ways, there was actually more dividing the colonies than uniting them. So why did they fall out with the British Empire? At first, many colonists felt close cultural and economic ties with their mother country, Britain. But over time, more people were born in America and began to think of themselves more as Americans rather than Britons. A major trigger was taxes and war. Between 1756 and 1763, Britain fought the 7 Years' War with France, and this was sort of a mini world war between France and Britain in all their colonies around the world. Britain won the war and gained control of French colonies in North America, but victory came at a cost. Britain had racked up a massive national debt. To raise money, Parliament imposed new taxes on the American colonies. The most infamous tax was the Stamp Act of 1765, which was essentially a tax on all paper products. This could be legal documents, letters, newspapers, pamphlets, etc. The British government thought this was fair, since the people of Britain were already paying this tax. Well, this was badly misjudged and the colonists were outraged. The main objection was not actually the money, but the fact that they had no representatives in Parliament to approve these taxes. The colonists adopted the famous slogan, "No taxation without representation." Interestingly, this demand resonated with many ordinary people back in Britain, since the majority of British citizens could not vote either. But as you can imagine, the British government were like hell no to these demands, setting up over a decade of escalating conflict. In the following years, Britain passed more laws to assert their control over the colonies. Many of the colonists were actually divided themselves. Some, called patriots, resisted British rule, while loyalists wanted to stay connected to Britain. Boston became a centre of patriot resistance. It was here that one of the most important events happened. It came after the British passed the Tea Act of 1773, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies, cutting out colonial merchants. This angered colonists, who saw it as another way Britain was trying to control them and their economy. That December, a group of colonists, disguised as Mohawk Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbour and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbour, worth around £1.5 million in today's money. This protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain cracked down hard, sending thousands of troops and passing even stricter laws to keep the colonists in line. By 1775, things had reached a breaking point. In April, fighting broke out between colonial militias and British soldiers at Lexington and Concord. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but it became known as the shots heard around the world. The American Revolutionary War had begun. So now we're moving on to the events of the war, but I'll give you another cause here, which is key individuals and ideas. At first, it wasn't really clear what the end goal of the colonists were. They were about to take on one of the most powerful countries in the world. Some wanted to teach the British a lesson and stop the taxation, but others were more revolutionary and wanted full independence from the British Empire. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, a pamphlet making the case for full independence in clear, plain language so that ordinary people could understand it. It sold over 500,000 copies, huge numbers for the time, and shifted public opinion towards full independence from Britain. Then came Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Declaration of Independence. Approved on the 4th of July 1776, It declared that all men are created equal, with unalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Crucially, the Declaration argued that governments must serve the people, and if they fail, then the people have the right to create a new one. This declaration is why every year Americans celebrate the 4th of July as Independence Day. There are also many other countries around the world who also celebrate independence from the British Empire. Okay, so the British obviously saw the declaration as treason and sent troops to crush the rebellion. Early on, British forces often overpowered the poorly trained and undisciplined militias of the colonists. But under George Washington's leadership, the colonists started to gain some victories. Then international support came as the French joined in 1778, followed by Spain, and the tide began to shift. The key moment came in 1781 at Yorktown when the British surrendered to French and American forces. This pretty much ended any real chance of British victory, and in 1783 the Treaty of Paris was signed, which recognised American independence and cut ties with the British Empire. So what then were the consequences of the American Revolution? We'll split this up into 3 different areas: for America, for Britain, and for the wider world. First of all, for America, a new independent country was created as the 13 colonies became the United States of America. This was the first time that a colony had rejected rule by European power and would inspire independence movements in centuries to come. A new democratic government was established with a constitution, a Congress, and a president, a system still in place 250 years later. But on the flip side for Britain, the loss of the 13 colonies was a huge blow to national pride and prestige. The government faced a lot of criticism at home, and the ideas of no taxation without representation encouraged new radical movements in Britain. During the 19th century, we will see this idea of representation at the forefront of British history, with demands for changing the voting system. The British feared a similar revolution in Britain, and for the next 50 years, political radicals were dealt with harshly. Finally, for the wider world, after losing their colonies in America, Britain decided to building its empire in other parts of the world. Historians have called this the swing to the east, as the British Empire started to focus on countries like India, Australia, and New Zealand. The American Revolution also helped to inspire other revolutions, as its ideas inspired the French Revolution of 1789 and the Haitian Revolution. These would reshape global history. That seems like a good place to end, and in the next video, we will go back to Britain and be looking at these demands for the right to vote with the Chartist movement. See you then.